What's up, y'all? We're back for another Tuesday night live stream. And so I wanted to I'm throwing in a couple of different topics here. I want to start out with a little bit of media analysis, get into some cultural stuff that was kind of kicked off by me replaying. I replayed God of War Ragnarok. I've just beat the game again on New Game Plus. I'm probably going to go back and go for, let me take them out there, but I'm probably going to go back and go for highest level difficulty. Um, after I clear this run, I got a couple of other things, but God of War Ragnarok got me thinking. Watching, and if you've played the game, spoiler alert, or if you haven't played the game, spoiler alert. It's about the former bloodlusted, bloodthirsty uh, um, anti-hero from the original God of War series um, as a father, and him dealing with past trauma, learning how to become a better person, how to build a relationship with his son, and also dealing with his own grief demons. And so there was a lot that went into this, like a lot. And so um, I wanted to. All right, that's better. I wanted to talk about performing masculinity and performative masculinity and the different ways that we see it. I have so many notes on it that a lot of my notes got crossed up, so I'm going to have to go and dig around for that stuff. So we're going to talk Superman Returns, and just my impression of it. It's my trying to get into my media analysis bag again. I used to have, back in the days, I used to have a feature that I used to write when I was writing for Long Boxing While Black. It was called Weirdest Shit I've Ever Seen. And Bryan Singer's Superman movie came across on that one. So I wanted to dust off some of my old media analysis skills and see what I can do with that one. In the last segment, I'm just going to share some stuff that I have from my days of working in direct care and in case management. And so it just felt natural to do. I was actually going to do an entire segment, and I may still, depending on how much time we have. Um, I'm starting to realize this weird, like I have this weird working theory. And so I think that Oprah, like the old Oprah Winfrey show, when she used to have her regular show that came on syndicated, it was this weird right wing pipeline for grifters. And let's look at it. Let's look at some of the people she's had. And so I'm actually probably going to be doing a more focused deep dive video on this topic. And it's going to go right next to my I thought there would be more ninjas. The city stuff about Midwestern cities being gigantic criminal enterprises that they build structure around. And then another one is I want to talk about the weird Oprah to right wing grifter pipeline that was prevalent in when she like in the 2000s when she was still doing her show. And I can off the top of my head, Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil, JD Vance. JD Vance to a lesser degree, but she did elevate him with that bullshit story about being a fake poor person that he foisted off upon us to the tune of the vice presidency of the United States. Yeah, JD Vance is a fake poor person. Like it's the highest of high capping. Like it's the craziest work. Anyway. So I may do that. I think that's going to end up being a standalone segment. I want to see how much time I get on this one. All right. So first things first, segment one, we're going to talk about the weirdest shit I've ever seen. And it was Superman Returns. Now, if you have not seen Superman Returns, I don't know if you're doing yourself a favor by watching it. I don't necessarily consider it a favor. It's an experience. I'll put it that way. If you're a fan of the old kind of Christopher Reeve Superman movies, okay, because Brandon Routh looks like he looks like Christopher Reeve. Like I mean, it's just he looks exactly like him. Like there's no mistaking it. He was almost a perfect fit for the role. Okay. Um, as vile as Kevin Spacey, vile and contemptible as of a human being as we found out Kevin Spacey is, he's actually pretty good as Lex Luthor. Like it made sense as Lex Luthor. Now, I'm talking about from a character standpoint. I'm not talking about it from a writing standpoint because the writing is where it really gets really, really weird. It's a really bizarre movie. Okay. But to give a little backstory, Superman Returns came out in 2006. It was a superhero movie. It was a superhero movie in the sense that it was about a superhero. It didn't have any of the other beats of superhero. It was about a superhero going out doing superhero-y stuff, but it's like they decided that we're gonna make a superhero movie with no real actual action. Like he's not doing anything. There's no real stakes in this movie up until the last act, the last couple of acts. And when we get to that, the movie took a hard left turn. But but yeah, superhero movie directed by Bryan Singer. We didn't know how vile of a person he was. It wasn't common knowledge. Um, and written by Mike Doherty and Dan Harris. Okay. And it's based on Superman. It's kind of serves as a spiritual successor to the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And you could see a lot of how they did it. Okay. It's about Superman coming back after after being gone for 5 years. Um, and he traveled, basically got word that they found the remains of Krypton. He traveled out to see where the remains of Krypton was. That was the kind of the setup why Superman was gone. This is what he was returning for. Okay. Now I went to go see this movie in theaters, and I was really hyped to see this. Like I was excited as hell to go see this new Superman movie because I came up watching the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and I watched 1, 2, and 3, and then whatever that one where he fought the radioactive guy. And here's the crazy part. I didn't know a lot about things. I knew that was a bad movie. And I was a little kid and I knew that was a terrible movie. That was probably one of the first movies where I'm like, this sucks. Anyway, I was a fan of the Christopher Reeves movies. And I'm like, all right, cool. It's a nostalgic hit. I'm gonna go see this on the big screen. I saw it twice. Yeah. And so I think the movie wanted to be a superhero movie. Like I really do think it wanted to be your basic superhero movie. Okay. It was a drama with Superman in it. It was a drama with Superman in it. And then somehow it turned into an episode of Oz. Like at the end, it turned into an episode of Oz. They didn't do anything to set you up for this, to prepare you for what it was going to turn into. It just did. It just happened. It was jarring to the point where there was a kid in the theater crying because he's like, "Oh my God, what are they doing to Superman?" Like Superman got worked over that. Like, it was crazy. And so anyway, it starts out he's not really doing anything. He's back. He sees everybody, and I'm kind of going off the top of my head because it's been at least a couple months since I rewatched it, just to, because it's just been a while. He comes back. He's getting reestablished on Earth. He does some superhero things. He flies up and does the Superman stuff where he stops a bank robbery and then they shoot him and the bullets bounce off of him. And then they have the slow motion where the bullet bounces off his eye. He catches an airplane. He does all of this stuff. In the meantime, he finds out that Lois has a son and she's moved on with random dude who was Cyclops in the X-Men movie. And apparently they wrote him off of X3 so he could be in this Superman movie. And they really shouldn't have done that because he served no function in this movie until the last bit of it. And I'm not going to give you a blow by blow review of it. I may save that for a video where I can take an in-depth dive on it. So we're just kind of going through my top of the mind thoughts on it. Okay. The movie forgot to be a superhero movie, and I cannot stress that enough. It was 2.5 hours of drama and relational drama, and Superman really like being like, oh, it's awesome. He's catching planes and stuff like that. He doesn't punch anything. He just flies around and shows that how invulnerable he is. If it was not for that, if it was not for the final part of the movie, it would have been the most boring movie you've ever seen in your life. But the hard turn just fascinates me. Okay. And so you don't punch anybody. He just flies around. He catches the plane. He stares at Lois like he's trying to remember her name sometimes. She has this kid. Neither one of them seem to know that it's Superman's kid. I don't know how this happened, where they're just both shocked that he has They never really fully explained it. Maybe it might have been something got left on the editing room floor where they gave us a bit of context where there was some ambiguity about the kid being Superman's kid. Because the way they framed it didn't make an ounce of sense. Like it was a big surprise and shock to everybody. And I don't know how one or the other or both, probably both parties were not aware of this unless there was some really, really unseedy stuff that happened. Maybe that's it. So 2.5 hours, nothing is happening. Like it's just character drama, right? And then out of nowhere, in the third act, here's the thing. Lex got a hold of a crystal. Got a hold of this crystal from you know, from the Fortress of Solitude, apparently. Um, and it was one of the crystallized cities. The way that they kind of put the literature, and if you look in the old Superman books and stuff like that, even the comic books and the movies and stuff, Krypton was a crystalline city, if you will. That's what it kind of looked like. Fortress of Solitude is made of crystal, and so he got a piece of this crystal, and I cannot remember the mechanism by which this happened, but the crystal got mixed with kryptonite, thrown in the ocean off the coast of Metropolis, and basically created its own island. Now, here's the part that didn't make any sense, because this is where one of the major disconnects. Okay, Lex is presented as a pretty competent guy, pretty intelligent guy, greedy, full of avarice. Lex. Lex's motivation in Superman comics has been, I don't like Superman because I think he's a threat, and he is it's a weird jealousy thing. Like he has this weird infatuation with Superman, and so he sees Superman as this existential threat to humans, and so he's the hero. In Lex's mind, he is the hero of the story. In this movie, he's just Captain Planet villain, evil for the sake of evilness, because he throws the chunk of crystal into the water and instantly it starts growing an island. And the island grows so rapidly that it's on track to destroy the entire eastern seaboard. And Lex doesn't care. Oh well. It's a real estate play now. I've just destroyed the world. It's a real estate play now. I've doomed the world. Because it's catastrophic. Like if the eastern seaboard is taken out and part of the United States goes underwater, that is a catastrophe on levels that people do not fathom. And it's going to be a global catastrophe, because what's to stop this island from growing and encroaching on Europe and the coast of Africa and stuff like that? Like, what's to stop this thing from going that direction, right? But he just did it heedless of what the consequences were. Like, it'll be a real estate play. Just stupid, right? And so that was the villain. The villain of this Superman movie was Lex Luthor and this island that he was growing. For no reason. It didn't make any sense. Like he said it was going to be a real estate play, I guess. I don't understand it. And so, and I'm kind of looking at the wiki to make sure I'm getting the story right. Lex stole kryptonite, and that's how he mixed it with the kryptonite, Kryptonian crystals. Okay, whatever. So we have this island growing off the coast of Metropolis, threatening to basically kill everybody on the eastern seaboard, and then it's going to spread inward and possibly the world. Like, we don't know. Superman has to go stop it. He lands on the island and he confronts Lex. And this is where the hard turn took. And it was a hard turn. It came out of nowhere. And it's really the only reason why I really low-key kind of enjoy the movie. Like this weird, perverse sense of, wow, this is an absolute disaster. I can't take my eyes off of it. Because Lex and his henchmen dog walk Superman and shank him. I'm not talking about stabby with a knife. Like I'm watching Oz. Dude he has the shank in the pillowcase. He walks up behind dude, sticks him right in the kidneys, and incapacitates him or kills him. That's what Lex did to Superman. And then after they stabbed him, they beat his ass. They beat Superman's ass. It came out of nowhere. Nothing in the movie had led up to this. And the rest of the movie was this homage to Christopher Reeve and Superman flying around and saving things and playing the Superman music and all this other stuff. And then the last act turned into an episode of Oz out of nowhere. And they jumped Superman and they shanked Superman. And I'm in the theater and a child is crying because he's like, oh my God, what are they doing to Superman? Make it stop. They beat the holy hell of Superman and tried to drown him in a puddle. It was gully. It came out of nowhere. And after Superman was beaten, nearly drowned in a puddle, and shanked up by Lex Luthor himself, they kicked him off the side of the island. Because apparently that's just how it goes. Like, the bad guys never check to see if they've actually killed the guy. They just throw him off the side of the island. It happened with Killmonger, happened with Lex Luthor. That's an ongoing theme. I think they teach you that whenever you're getting your apprentice paperwork as a bad guy. Never follow and see to make sure that the protagonist is dead. So they shank Superman, beat him soundly, and then threw him off the side of this island for him to drown. And in a very Superman way, the climax of the movie was him lifting the island and throwing it into outer space, and then falling, with the Jesus metaphor, arms outstretched, falling back to Earth, and him going into the hospital. And then they wrap it up by Superman finding out that he has a child that neither him nor Lois knew about, even though Lois was pregnant with this child, and just has no recollection of any kind of physical thing that would have any way of that she would have gotten impregnated by Superman. And he just hovers outside the window looking like a stalker. Weirdest shit I've ever seen. And I enjoyed it. Like, I like bad movies. I like movies that have befuddling actions in them. I do enjoy that kind of stuff. And so I'm not going to front. I've seen this movie multiple times just because of how confounded I was, and how jarring that last act is. It came out of nowhere. Nothing had been happening up until this point. Then all of a sudden, everything's happening. And it's not everything's happening in a Superman movie. It's everything from an episode of Oz happening in a Superman movie. Fantastic. If you ever get a chance, sit down. If you ever want to just be mind blown by how a formerly competent director just slaps together ideas, go for it. I think they gave Bryan Singer full creative control over it, and to the point where they basically said he basically said don't have any test audiences or anything. We're gonna give it to him raw. Just gonna show it to him the way it is. And that's what it was. It was beautifully shot. Special effects were great. It was really interesting. But the writing, the script, I don't know what happened. It feels like they cut out a whole swath of the film. Like, there's a chunk of the movie that is missing that sets us up for Superman getting shanked up and stabbed and almost drowned in a puddle. After all this stuff of nothing happening. Okay. And I look at it like, and I'm reading through the accolades of it. Like, it got best visual effects. Everybody seemed to love it. Well, Golden Raspberry to Kate Bosworth. Okay. Like, it's weird. Maybe I'm the only one that felt this was just an odd movie. But like, Empire ranked it 496 on the 500 greatest movies of all time. How? How? This wasn't even the best Superman movie. But I digress. I had a good time with it. My My wife is kind of forgetting me because the best story I have about the weirdest shit I've ever seen was Batman versus Superman. That was a smorgasbord of just uh, over the top weirdness. A director absolutely having to, really just, I have control of this. I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want to, kind of ethos. So I'm on Superman Returns. I will eventually convince her to allow me to talk about her reaction to Batman versus Superman because it's adorable and hilarious. Okay, so here are the things with Superman Returns. First of all, it forgot to be a superhero movie at some point in time. Second, um, there's this weird whiplash. It was jarring, and if you watch it unprepared, it will absolutely jar you. Okay. Um, I think Singer was wanted to make a melancholy superhero movie that was not as involved as the stuff he had done with the X-Men movies. And I think he wanted to make one about, the residual faith and identity and finding oneself, and then returning to the world after the hero's journey. Okay, I feel like he wanted to do that. Um, I just don't think it landed. I don't really think it landed. Because there's too much that was left out. It was a 2.5 hour movie, so it was already over long. And part of it being over long, it was over long for no real good reason because there wasn't anything happening really in the movie. Look at the good chunk of this movie. There was nothing happening in this movie. Just intense stares and Superman flying off, and Lois kind of, you left us, you abandoned us. Superman kind of mending the relationships that he damaged by taking off. Okay. It's not bad. It was just jarring. And it was not it wasn't entertaining in the sense of there's there's a visual spectacle going on the screen. I can get with that. But it wasn't entertaining from a storytelling standpoint. Okay. Um yeah, it was an experience. Okay. Um So that's my take on the Superman Returns. I'm probably gonna have a more in-depth, more media analyses thing. I'm going back and pulling my article so I can, because I spent a lot of time. I spent a couple weeks writing that article about why Superman was the weirdest shit I've ever seen. All right, so I did the comic book stuff. Um, and I'll touch base on it real quick. Like where I'm at, I'm kind of sitting around to see what happens with what they do with DC KO. Um, and KO stands for King Omega. I'm trying to see where they go with this, because it's a Superman story, and they have not minced any words about it being a Superman centric story. And it's going to be Superman versus Darkseid. I do feel like there's going to be a twist somewhere in here, but right now they're setting it up with Superman in the bout between Darkseid, and they set it up like it's going to be a gladiatorial combat kind of thing, and then at the end is Superman fighting Darkseid for King Omega. Okay, let's see what happens. My hope is that they actually merge or allow the absolute universe to continue to exist, but my fear is that they're going to use this to step on the absolute universe, which has absolutely been the best thing that DC has created in years. Hands down, one of the best things they've created in years. And my fear is once this KO event goes, they're going to say, okay, absolute universe, you've been awesome. You've revitalized these stories. You've gotten, like, I even got into Absolute Flash. I wasn't even interested in Absolute Flash, and I read it and I was hooked. Absolute Green Lantern, new reframing of the Green Lantern Corps and how their powers work. Absolute Wonder Woman. We're going to take Wonder Woman, we're going to put her in hell. We're still going to make her basically the same character, but she just has to come from hell. And there's more magic based. Like, really interesting takes on it. Superman came to Earth. He came to Earth as a teenager. Like he spent most of his formative years on Krypton. He comes to Earth as a young man. Okay, interesting stuff. And then Absolute Batman. I've done multiple episodes about Absolute Batman. Absolute Batman is probably my best comic book of the year from the mainstream publishers. Just amazing. I'm not even a huge Batman fan, but I'm blown away by the characterization of how they've taken Batman and said, okay, we're going to strip away. He's going to keep all the intellect. He's going to keep the fact that he's a formidable combatant. We're going to make him huge, make him absolutely brolic. Like he's going to be an absolute unit. He's going to be 6'8", 450 pounds of Batman. But we're going to add some layers of character depth to him. And we're not going to kill off both of his parents. And so he's going to have something to fight for. And the entire tone of the absolute DC universe is this. In the regular DC universe, the villains are the chaos. They represent the chaotic side of life. Like they're destabilizing status quo. They're trying to upset the apple cart, blah, 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 blah. In the absolute universe, the superheroes, the heroes represent the chaos to the brutal repression of the mainstream. Like the mainstream, the status quo is brutal repression. And the heroes are the chaos elements in it because it's a universe basically formed of dark side. And so, it kind of goes along with the theme of the anti-life equation and submission and all that other stuff. And so it's just an interesting take on it. I really hope that they don't get rid of it. I really hope it sticks around for the next couple of years. I'm interested to see where they actually take these stories. But I have this fear that we're going to get rushed through the rest of the absolute universe, and this universe deserves a lot better. All right, next topic. So I finished. I played God of War Ragnarok. I'm a huge God of War fan. And so I've played all the games multiple times. I think the only one I haven't played is probably Ascension. At least I don't remember playing Ascension. I may have. And so when they announced, the God of War remake coming out, I think it was 2018, I was all over it. And I got it and I played the hell out of it. I replayed it and replayed it and replayed it multiple times. Had a great time with it. And set it down, and I went back into my Overwatch thing. And, Overwatch is my main game. And Ragnarok came out and it just took over my existence from the video gaming standpoint for, another almost 6 months to a year. And so I was going through my old PS4 and just playing games I haven't touched in a while. And so I replayed all of DMC5. And I'm actually still I think I'm doing Virgil, and I think I'm on King Cerberus right now. And he's absolutely beating the dog shit out of me. It's on one of the higher difficulties. I don't do the low difficulty stuff. And so I stopped there. And so I decided I'm going to give Ragnarok another playthrough. Just because I wanted to go. I had never really went through New Game Plus. I just picked up the game for where it was and played it. And so I finished out all the missions, got 100% on everything, and said, I'm going to do New Game Plus and see what happens. And I'm going to try it at the higher difficulty. And so I just beat it last night again on New Game Plus, and I'm about to ratchet up the difficulty again. But one of the things I'm left with the story, especially after playing Valhalla, the Valhalla DLC, is one of the themes in God of War is Kratos reckoning with his identity and how he perceives himself. And that's the theme through the whole story. It colors his interactions with Faye, his wife, his deceased wife, Atreus, his son, and every other character that he interacts with. He's running from his past, and he has the residual guilt of it. And I know the guy who created the God of War series on PlayStation, who doesn't like the fact that they made Kratos woke. They made Kratos feel like a human being as opposed to a killing machine. And if you want him to remain a killing machine, that's fine. There's God of Wars that aren't the remake, aren't the reboot. You can play those, but we like we like the new Kratos. Like, we like him. He actually has depth. He has a character that you can empathize with, and you get to understand why he did what he did and watch him come to terms with who he is. It's really a good thing. It's a dope thing about growth and fatherhood and dealing with grief and everything. It's a nice reflection on that. And so the guy who invented, like I said, the guy who created, and I forgot what his name was. Let me look it up real quick. Creator of God of War. Cory Balrog. Here's the thing about Cory, and this is just what I know about him. I'm sitting there looking at him. What I see He's about my age. He's a little bit older than me. Um, I see middle-aged edgelordian white dude. Um, I see he was he's a game designer. I'm not taking that away from him, right? Like that's what he's been doing. He's been in the game for a while. Um, was it Corey Balrog? No, it wasn't Corey Balrog. Who is the guy who came up? There's one of the creators, and now I'm backtracking a little bit. Corey seems cool. Is David Jaffe? Yeah, that's my guy. Okay, now he's definitely older than me. Damn, he made Twisted Metal, dude. I hate to be on your neck for this, bro. I really do. Um, I hate to be on his neck for Twisted Metal, bro, because Twisted Metal was my joint. Um, Twisted Metal was my move. Was another one of my games. So I don't want to dog on him too much, but he had an issue with how Kratos was like how God of War portrayed Kratos and whatnot, and I think Corey Balrog kind of saved him from it. So sorry for putting slander on your name, Corey. Um, sorry for putting slander on your name, bro. If this is who the guy is, you've made one of my favorite games of all time. I apologize for this. I think it was David Jaffe who did not like the new Kratos. Um, one of those guys didn't like the new Kratos. It couldn't have been Corey Balrog because he was the main guy. Yep. He's not happy. He thinks Kratos has gone soft because Kratos actually has humanity and stuff like that. And I see tubby white dude, and I'm not rocking. I'm not bagging, but I see he doesn't look like he knows anything about a hard life. Could be wrong, but I see Edge Lordian guy, and so he's mad because Kratos had character development. I'm just saying all that. David Jaffe. Sorry, Corey Balrog. I don't even put slander on your name. It was David Jaffe who had issues with Kratos' recharacterization in the new God of War uh, games. I think the character is dope. I like the fatherhood element. I like seeing other sides to it. I like the fact that he's dealing with some post traumatic stress. I like the fact that he actually has issues with how he treated people, being haunted by the fisherman that he killed. Was it either one or two where he basically allowed him to be eaten by the Hydra. Like I really enjoy that kind of stuff, and I think it adds a layer to the character that makes playing with him in an open world game where he's kind of the narrative device where you're just kind of following him through the world. I think you had to humanize him a bit because you couldn't just have grunt, kill, have sex Kratos in an open world game and that's all you do is follow him around. Um, with a kid, it didn't work. Okay, and so I finished the game, and um, one of the things, the reason why I enjoy the God of War series is it's a nice reflection on masculinity and fatherhood and what manhood actually is and how we define it um, as a society um, in our independent communities. Because a lot of times manhood is a cultural. It's really based on the culture that you kind of grew up in and stuff like that. And so, God of War, playing through it was a nice reflection on fatherhood. And so, I just have some thoughts on it. Okay. And I want to talk about, and David Jaffe, it's nice that I'm talking about him because it's almost his frustration with the God of War and what Kratos, the character growth Kratos has gone through. I think it's a perfect encapsulation of the concept of performative masculinity, performing manhood, going to perform it loud and obnoxiously and put it in your face every chance I get and assert and kill and crush and hurt and stuff like that. And I feel like that's his view of masculinity. And he's talking about Kratos has gone soft. To me, running away from your emotions or the only emotion that you ever feel is rage or anger, that's soft. That's soft to me. Come beat my ass about it. I don't care. But running away from the emotions and never um, taking time to experience them and trying to bury it in aggression that is performative masculinity. And more times than not, when we do performative masculinity, it's typically for an audience, and it's damaging. um, because it doesn't really show, especially if you have children, it doesn't necessarily show boys and girls. It doesn't necessarily show them how to be a functional adult. So that's just my off top. I do have my notes here. Okay. So when we talk about masculinity, and now we're going to get into the black stuff. So just it's blurting while dad. I'm a black nerd. I have to talk about it from a historical context. And so um, we talk about masculinity like it's one thing. Um, and I think a lot of times when we utilize when we talk about the frameworks of how we view masculinity in a modern sense, is based on um, a patchwork of masculinity that we adopted. Especially if we're talking about descendants of the American slave trade, it was a patchwork, a framework of masculinity that was basically grafted and from the places where we resided, which for a lot of black folks, and it's not all of us, but for a lot of us, um, our family histories trace back to the slave trade. And so we are basically, we had our entire family structure, all of our titles, all of our connections, all of that was basically scrubbed away. And we were left as blank humans, or supposedly blank humans. And so, more times than not, the way that we structured our families and the way that masculinity was performed was based on what we saw on in that plantation world. And that's the frame of reference that we had. But before we got there, if you go back and look and read anthropologists and read people that have actually studied Africa before the surveyors came and and marked all the nations and everything and decided this nation is this nation, this nation is that nation. Um, there was multiple frameworks of masculinity and family structure and stuff like that. Like it was really context based and based on who you're interacting with. Okay. And so it wasn't like this one size fits all kind of box. Okay. Now there were patriarchal systems or matriarchal systems or systems that were built on more of a council when it came to decision making framework. Some were just based on who was the best qualified person. Like there was a wide swath and mix and variety to that side of it. And so, excuse me. And if I pause a lot, I'm trying to make sure I'm being as historically accurate because I spent a lot of time on this one. Okay. Um, and so there was no one size fits all. And the thing that slavery left us with was this one size fits all concept of masculinity, um, where it was this is the only way that men are allowed to perform. And a lot of times when it was seen on the slave plantation, like in a plantation, a willful child could get killed or sold. And so in order to protect your child, you had to make them not a willful child. And so that's where the over disciplining comes in. That's where the do as I say, top down authoritarian structure super comes from. Not really based on a lot of critical thinking, based on you need to listen to your elders because your elders are going to keep you from being sold or killed. Okay. Emotional distance, having to forge that emotional distance because at any point in time, the black family unit could, especially during the antebellum era, any given time, that black family unit can be sold to the four corners of the map and just ripped away. And so there was emotional distance that you had to make almost as an armor to protect yourself. Okay. And the concept of providing um, over presence. And so there's a lot of different nuances to this, and I'm not going to be able to tackle all of these in one live stream. This is an ongoing conversation. But I do need y'all to understand that when I talk about the performance of manhood and masculinity, Um, I do think a lot of us are still in this trap of, and it may not just be masculinity, it may be parenting in terms of it, performative parenting. That may be a more appropriate phase of it. But social media has added a new wrinkle to this where parents will broadcast disciplining children online. And I don't know if I see it as much, but there was a time where y'all was really crazy with it and embarrassing the kids to show how good of a parent you are. And even now, we see people hop online and talk about how tough their parents are on them, and act like beating their kids and whooping their kids is the answer to every single issue that their kids encounter. Um, and so I'm off my topic, but I see that as kind of performative parenting. Okay, so we talk about this concept of it. Um, it was the ultimate emasculation of black manhood to be on a plantation, have no ability to protect your wife or your children, or even yourself. And that was your entire existence. And I think a lot of times when we talk about slavery, we forget that this is a multiple generational thing. So people would live their entire lives in bondage, and their kids will live their entire lives in bondage. And that's the only world that they ever knew. And every single day, as a father, you get up realizing that you have no ability to protect your kids, to protect your wife, to provide for them, or even protect yourself. What does that do to a person's mindset in terms of when they're interacting with their family? I'm going to absolutely assert this dominance because I'm not able to do it in the way that's going to move the needle. And I think that's one thing that that's one thing that ended up harming and carried us through, but at the same time it hurt us. And look at it like this. Because when I start talking about the performative side of things, let's look at the other side of things where we had the maroon communities. I believe it was South Carolina, where you had the communities of escaped slaves. Um, and the hierarchical system was dependent on who was there the longest and who was the most competent. It wasn't based on man or woman as much as who can contribute and keep us alive. We just raided this plantation and liberated those slaves. Who's the best qualified person to lead in this context? It's a context-based thing. It wasn't performative power. It was real power. Who's the person that's best qualified to do this? Okay. So we talk about before slavery we had we had a litany of tribal models of family structures, um, depending on what region of Africa we were talking about. Shate, Dahomey, um, Igbo, Somali, um, I can never say the word, y'all, and I've typed it and I know what it is. Matrilineal systems, I think, like the Khan. And leadership was contextual, cooperative. Kin networks were extended and multi-generational. Okay. And then we come here and all that's been stripped away. Your language has been stripped away. All of that stuff's been stripped away. And the only thing you're able to duplicate is the performance of masculinity and manhood based on um, the the owner of the plantation. I'm not going to say master. I just can't bring myself to do it. The owner of the plantation, where it's strictly patriarchal, um, straight down the line. But the irony of it is, he's the softest guy. He's the softest guy on that plantation. The softest man on that plantation is the one that's running everything. The one that can't physically do anything, that has a limited ability to protect himself without any other outside interference or anything. The frailest individual is the one that's calling all the shots. Because even his wife is tougher. She had to give birth to kids and deal with his ass. But he is the one in power. He has power because he has possessions. He has money. He has ownership. But it's not power in a real sense, because without minus the money and the trappings of money and the paid staff that could defend him, slaves have an uprising, he's done for. He's not going to be able to do anything. But a lot of times, and it's the height of irony that a lot of our concept of uh, how we perform patriarchy in this country is based off of that hierarchy. The guy who has the most money runs everything, and they make all the decisions, even though more times than not, they may not be the most qualified person. They damn sure can't fight for it. They don't have the physical ability to hold on to that position. All it is material based. That's my tangent. Sorry. And so, um, they destroyed kinship. Like, because even you could read up on the history of Africa and stuff. We had extended families, and even now, I grew up with my cousins like my siblings. My cousins are basically my siblings. There was no line that way. My mom, her cousins grew up in the same house as she did. They all kind of lived together for times. Um, and so they kind of grew up as siblings. It was extended family in the same house. It was just kind of a given. Okay. And you would just adopt people, like informally adopt people, such and such parents died. They're just adopted into the family. And that's how we roll. And so that was absolutely destroyed in the framework of slavery. And it was destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt. Those family ties were formed and severed and formed and severed multiple times throughout the 500 years of this theater. Um, Enslavement severed families, marriages, parenthood had no legal standing, and men were denied the roles of protector and provider. Okay. We grafted from the master's house. The visible family was a planter household with a patriarch with authority enforced by violence. That's the only authority that they had, was enforced by violence. They had to have underlings to deliver the violence because they weren't tough enough to do it themselves. And so enslavement, we ended up kind of adopting fragments of this hierarchy under duress because we had no authority. We had authority without real power. And it was an illusion of power, right? The master had the plantation owner had to use fear because they didn't really have physical power. They had to establish fear based. Okay. And so we copy the form of leadership without the foundation of the community. And like I said, I'm not trying to throw anybody any ancestors under the bus. So hopefully I'm not trying to give that sense. Okay. And there was a systematic emasculation under slavery, right? Removal of protection, no legal right to wives, no legal right to children. Families are ripped and sold apart at will. And masculinity as a protector became impossible and was punishable if asserted. You can be killed for defending your wife or kids. Okay. And so the way that we did it, the way we did have our power was we could use discipline to ensure our kids' survival and the fact that they stayed with us for as long as we could. So harsh child rearing emerged. Defiance could mean death or getting sold. And so it was tough love rooted in this survival mode. And the psychological inheritance that we got was strength becomes performance, stoicism, domination, control the house, be the man of the house. And it echoes in the modern frame because there's a group of guys that never experienced a father having those moments where they said, I love you, son, or being vulnerable with him. And so it ends up becoming this emotional distance, authoritarian, never letting them see you cry, and providing manhood through dominance. And here's the thing. So, and even I don't have any regard for Officer Tate. So but even how silly his shit was, where he's sitting there talking about if his child died, he wouldn't cry in front of his wife because he has to be strong for it. That is ridiculous. What you're doing is basically showing your wife and your children that they're going to suffer alone because you cannot join in the suffering with them because you have to hide it from everybody. But I mean, and I saw it on social media, bro. Charlie Kirk died, and this dude's crying and snot and doing all the carrying on and everything. But he said he wouldn't do that for his kid. Really weird performative masculinity there. You wouldn't cry for your children. You say you would not cry if something happened to one of your children because you need to be the assertive man for your wife. But then Your favorite podcaster dies, and you're on the internet snotting and crying and carrying on. That's what I'm talking about, performing masculinity. That is the highest level of performative masculinity. Because you're too tough. I'm too tough to show that emotion in front of my wife. But when this person who is basically a stranger. I mean, I know that he is a fan and everything. I don't know if he knew the guy personally. If he knew him personally, it might be a little bit different, but you'll cry for a stranger before you cry for your kids. That's crazy work to me. And to me, that's a performance that you're putting on for social media to pretend like you're tough for these people in the crowd, and they really don't care. All right. So I talked about the maroon communities. If you don't know what the maroon communities are, and I'll spell it for you. That's MAROON. Look it up, because this is really good it's really good history about slavery that they don't teach you in schools. The maroon communities were non-performative and competence-based leadership, and they were focused on survival. And so maroon communities were basically pockets of freedmen and escaped slaves. They established themselves in basically the swamps around South Carolina, Georgia, the Great Dismal Swamp, and they hid in very difficult terrain so that they couldn't get invaded. Um, and it made it so that retaliation was very, very costly for the people that were targeting them, and that would be the anti-slave, that would be the slave hunters, slave hunting patrols, the posses, militias, all that other stuff that the plantation owners could hire. Okay, the maroon communities were independent freedmen and escaped slaves who lived on their own. They lived independently, and they would often raid nearby plantations to free and liberate people. Okay, leadership was by qualification. Survival skills determined your authority. Gender was secondary. If she knew the route, she was the one that took points. She was the one that led. And the raids were to free enslaved people, secure supplies, and maintain autonomy. Okay, so when we talk about that as juxtaposed against the contrast of manhood on the plantation, we're talking about competence versus coercion, service versus spectacle, and these men and women actually lived in embodied strength as opposed to like actually just performing it. Okay, more or less, we borrowed patriarchy. Like, and I know that that's a buzzword for the edge lords out there. More patriarchy, blah blah blah. We borrowed it. We borrowed patriarchy uh, from the people on the plantation, and we need to give it back. um, because what happened was, as freedmen got out there, we started doing um, what was it? We started doing respectability politics. Like I can't put it any other way. So freedmen sought legitimacy by mimicking like the Victorian ideas of the breadwinner. Okay, and churches and institutions reinforced the head of household, and you find that a lot in upwardly well black communities and stuff, where it's a return to tradition and um, basically copying or aping, duplicating. I hate saying aping. I should not have said that. Duplicating um, the power structure of white folks, more or less, the familial structures of white folks. That is seen as proper, um, and everything else is not proper. And it was respectability, right? And they enforced the head of household. Emotional suppression. This is the cost of respectability politics. Um, Emotional suppression, rigid gender roles. Women weren't necessarily set up for the world that they were actually going to be encountering in the post antebellum South and then North as we moved into the Great Migration and the Industrial Age and everything. And so we inherited the performance of manhood without the piece of what masculinity and manhood actually was, because we still had a limited ability to protect us and our family and kinfolk from the aggressions of white folks that meant to do us harm. And so early Black women's movement, mutual aid societies, and support and cooperative economics hinted at returning to that communal balance that we kind of we had different iterations of coming from Africa. But um the performance of the masculinity, it wasn't just limited to slavery. It ended up becoming reverberating through the Black church. I mean, yes, I understand the Black church was a lot of times the epicenter of a lot of our more revolutionary stuff, especially during the civil rights movement in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even the 70s. It was kind of the epicenter of our Black political organizing and stuff, but it also did reinforce some of these patriarchal roles and expectations of performative manhood. But there was also an element to it, because if you've ever read We Shoot Back, they talked about it. A lot of those young men that were out there, especially in the Mississippi theater of the civil rights era, they were like, "We're protecting our communities, we're protecting our women," and that's why they armed themselves to protect. But in some cases, the women were even armed. So yeah, it is what it is. And I'm not going down that rabbit hole tonight. There's a lot here, and to be honest with you, I have a whole lot more, and so I may just put a bow tie on this and come back to it. But I'm giving my last part here that I've written out, and then I have a whole other sheet of stuff for this segment, and I'm probably going to be splitting it up. Okay. Um, One of the things I think we can do when we have the luxury, a little bit more of the luxury now, determining what kind of father you want to be, what kind of husband you want to be. You aren't not locked to the roles of your parents or grandparents. You get to determine how much you hug your kids, how much you sacrifice materially so that you can be present with your kids. You get to determine all these things. You don't have to be locked into these rigid roles that were foisted upon you. You don't have to have this authoritarian mindset when rearing your children that prevents them from forming their ability to think critically of things, where it's a blind subservience or blind allegiance to authority. Because one of the things I'm gonna tell you, and I'm going to go into my caseworker and residential services bag, because I've been in all facets of human care and residential care for kids and families and stuff. One of the things I'm gonna tell you guys, and I need the parents to understand this and lock in on this: the authority figure for your children is not always an adult. If you do not build your child's ability to think critically, they will find an authority figure, and that authority figure will not always be another adult. More times than not, it won't be. And so if you beat all the critical thinking out of your child and never allow them to form the muscle of questioning authority and determining which authority is just, which authority is fair, which authority is coercive, you're setting your kid up to be the kind of follower that you don't want them to be, because they will never be able to discern they won't be able to discern between the coercive authority and the supportive authority. Ideally, the parent should be the supportive authority. That's why I'm not a big fan of the hard line, tough love stuff with kids, because sometimes your kids need to be able to tell the difference between you and somebody out on the street that's going to take advantage of them. The authoritarian parenting model, and I can tell you this from hundreds of kids that have come through my programs. When, as a parent, if you are overly authoritarian, one of the things that you're doing that at the cost of is your kid's ability to think critically. Part of a child's development is going through a phase where they question your authority, where they expect that you explain why the rule is the way that it is, and where they go break the rule and have to face the consequence of it. But that consequence cannot be apocalyptic, end of the world kind of stuff. Sometimes that consequence is a natural consequence. But if you beat all the willfulness out of this child, if you remove their ability to think critically, you are setting themselves up to fall under the sway of another authority figure that's external to you. And more times than not, that authority figure will be another kid. I've seen it play out hundreds and hundreds of times. And when I talk about residential, I talk about I had kids in my shelters that couldn't be maintained anywhere else. I had a kid who literally got kicked detention, out of the detention center because they couldn't maintain him, and we maintained him. And that's not a brag, and that's not cap. We maintain kids that could not be maintained anywhere else. And it almost came, they say, well, these kids are bad, they got away with everything. Almost every single one of my hardcore, like the high level gang member kids, reported being beaten severely as punishment and came from authoritarian households, the low level ones. And then we got a kid who wasn't a low level gang member. His dad was an OG. And so this kid kind of learned the ropes of leadership from this kid. And he came in the house and had them boys under his thumb in a heartbeat. And I had to monitor that with my staff. Because the boys that he had under his thumb, their critical thinking skills were not present at all, because that critical thinking was punished out of them. They were never able to question why with their parents. You need to allow your kids to ask you questions and to be able to push back against your authority. That is a natural pathway of development. Now, I say that with the historical understanding that back in the days, pre-civil rights, civil rights, antebellum South, all that stuff, having a willful child that questioned authority could get them killed. And that's where that comes from. So I understand where it comes from, but now it's time to understand the world we're existing in right now. If you want to build a leader, if you want to build a child that's a leader, or somebody that doesn't go down the course of path, or even if they do screw up, they realize they screw up and make the corrections, as opposed to just blindly following somebody. You have to allow that kid to question, and you have to be within your logic of the reason why your rules are set up the way. You have to have an internal logic of why your rules are set up this way, so that you can explain it to this kid. But don't punish their ability to question you or defy you sometimes. It doesn't feel great. I've been there. It doesn't feel great. But I have to be honest with you. It is part of the growing cycle. Don't stymie the kid's ability to think critically. All right. So that we're going to come back to that. The performance of masculinity is something that just fascinates me, and it's going to be some ongoing theme here, because this is what Blurting While Dad is. It's about fatherhood. And a lot of times in the fatherhood realm, we have to deal with concepts of what makes a man, and what makes a father a father. Okay. But so I'm gonna go into a little bit lighter heart stuff before I wrap this thing up. So those that know me know that my entire background before I started my businesses, um, my background was in case management, um, frontline working in residential environments, creating residential environments for kids, creating pro-social residential environments for kids, and I worked all the way from frontline to director of my own program. And so I kind of know a little bit about my shit. I taught parenting courses. I taught all this stuff. And so that's what my background is. I'm talking about some misadventures from my case management days. Okay. So I'm setting the stage for you. Okay. I was a supervisor working with family support workers. And one of our other locations needed a little bit of coverage because they were short on workers, because they weren't necessarily great at maintaining workers. And so it was kind of a rotating thing, and it was my turn to go help out and pitch it and do some direct family support work as a supervisor. Okay. Now understand this. I'm coming in as, I'm coming in with a supervisor experience. On a daily basis, I do supervisory tasks and make high level decisions and filter them down to my staff. So my decision making capacity was already solid in terms of this, and I was like by the book and how we're going to do this the right way. And so I'm trying not to give too many details, but this wasn't another state. It was a neighboring state that I was helping out in. So I'm in the house. And I'm not going to give away why this family had court mandated family support in the house, but you're going to get it. So I'm in the house, and the first time I'm in the house, I feel this weird coldness from the parents, especially from dad. He's acting weird. My job is just sit there and monitor and make sure nothing crazy goes on because they had crazy shit happen, and that's why family support was involved. Sitting in the house, and it's just like it really feels odd and everything. It just feels off. This whole thing feels off. And so, long story short, the reason why it felt off was because dad was a racist, like a big racist. Um, and he was worried that having a black family support worker, because he didn't know I was a manager. He thought having a black family support worker in and of itself was going to set a bad example for his kids. I don't know what he thought that I was doing. I was dressed up in my court clothes when I went in there and sat down, because a lot of times I was coming from my office where I was out supervising my staff. But in his mind, he thought that black family support worker is going to set a bad example for his kids. I don't know, where he thought just seeing black people was like this negative event in his world. I don't get it. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm gonna set a bad example for your kids. The reason why I'm here is because you got caught stealing copper wire out of people's houses, bro. I'm the bad example. You're questioning, you're looking at my example of coming in my church, in my court clothes, sitting here, guiding your kids, teaching your wife some parenting skills and stuff, but I'm the bad example because my black skin is just going to infect the brains of these children. I don't know what the thinking is. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm a bad example, but yeah, you got caught. The reason why I'm here is because you steal copper wire out of people's abandoned homes. Crazy work, bro. And like I said, I've explained that racism is not logical. It's not based and rooted in any rules of logic. And so a lot of times when you encounter somebody who's blindly racist like that, they're governed by more emotion related thinking than rational thinking. And you can't really separate the two, because a lot of times we need our emotions to make rational decisions. That's just how the human brain works. Um, no matter how logical we are, there's still a emotional component to our decision making process. But that was completely an emotional response. He didn't like black people, and he didn't want me in the house, and so I was a bad example. He was worried I was setting a bad example, but he's stealing copper wire out of people's homes. Don't steal copper wire out of people's homes. I won't even be here. You wouldn't even know my name. And so, and before then, I was kind of prepped for this, because years before, when I was working more direct care, and I was a little bit younger, my first real job was working in a group home. And so I was probably about maybe 23, 24. And I was in a house, and we had a young man. He's about 10-ish, I want to say. And he had supervised visitation with his parents. And so, and we had the date and everything. Parents were supposed to come through. And so I go into his room. His room is in shambles. I'm like, hey, kid, your parents are going to be here in about an hour or so. You need to clean this room up. And he tried to argue with me about it. And he got in trouble because he's arguing with me about cleaning his room. All right, cool. So 10-year-old, sorry, making sure my wire ain't coming out, is mad because I made him clean his room. Parents come. Parents are back there with kid and playing. This kid's still pissed off with me because I said, you need to clean your room so your parents have somewhere to sit and hang out. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying dad is, I'm 22, 23 years old. Mom is the same age I am. Dad is pushing, he had to be close to his 60s. Kid was 10 years old. Mom the same age I am. I'm 22 years old. Yuck. If you can do the math on this one. So this dude comes in, and his big thing is he's the dad that's going to come in and promise this kid all this stuff. He's going to buy him Jordans. He bought a new Cadillac. He just bought a new house that they all can move into. Just lying. That's his MO. And then he lied to this kid, get this kid wound up. The kid was a nightmare for us to deal with for the rest of the night when he left, because dad never came through on any of the things that he said he was going to do for this child. Okay. So I'm sitting there, we're debriefing, and coworker says, "Yeah, man, such and such dad, uh, he had a problem with how you handled his kid cleaning his room." Okay, that's fine. I just held him accountable and made sure he cleaned his room. Well, he's worried that you may not be qualified to tell him that. Not qualified to tell a 10-year-old to clean his room? Well, I mean, he's just questioning your decision making and making the kid clean his room before the visit. And finally, I'm like, bro, a crackhead is questioning my decision making ability. It came out, and they started dying. I'm like, no, man, listen, I am a humble guy. I don't feel like I know everything, and I normally don't put people in boxes like that. But bro, you smoke crack. Your decision making process leads you to ingest smoked crack rock. But my decision making is in question because I made your kid clean his room. Please be for real. um, And I basically said, I'm not taking that piece of feedback seriously, bro. You guys can write it out, write it down, or whatever. I am not taking that seriously. If there was something else about that, then I could take it seriously. But questioning my decision making because I made your kid clean his room and he was a little bit pissed off at me, um, I'm not going to do that because your kid was in a bad mood. He needed to clean his room so that he could have his mom and dad over. And I'm definitely not going to, this crackhead who also is probably a pedophile isn't going to dictate how, um, isn't going to change, or his feedback isn't going to change or impact my decision making ability, bro. That's insane work. And so, I mean, I have lots of stories from the case management days, bro. And I don't like to denigrate people based on that, but it's just my reflections. And I'm going to point out the more egregious things because I've dealt with plenty of people that were just overtly racist to me. I've dealt with plenty of people that were absolutely casting stones in glass houses. My job is not to put anybody down or anything, but I did find that funny. Um, and so that's what it is. So, I do have one more piece that I'm going to be probably working on over the next week. I want to talk about the Oprah Winfrey to right wing grifter pipeline. I feel like that's a thing. I got to do some research. I actually got to sit down and pull up some articles and see who worked where and when and stuff like that. But my working list right now of the Oprah Winfrey to right wing crackpot grifter pipeline, I have Dr. Oz, I have Dr. Phil, and I have JD Vance. So I'm gonna see if there's anybody else because I feel like the rule of three doesn't necessarily apply, but it may be substantive enough. I know that Oprah's connection with JD Vance was more or less she pushed that hillbilly elegy bullshit book where he pretended to be a poor person, um, and so maybe that's as far as it went. But I got to look it up and I got to see. Um, but yeah, I'm working on that one possibly for next week. I want to see where that one goes because I feel like that one. I feel like that one has legs. I really do. I feel like there's something there with that one. Just because I look at what Dr. Phil keeps trying to launch this conservative unwoke network or whatever that like is his goal or what he wants to do. Um, and it keeps failing. It keeps tanking. And we know where Dr. Oz is right now. He is um, shilling his snake oil at the highest levels of government. And then JD Vance, and there's a couple of other people that were featured in there that turned into right wing. I can never say it. Right wing grifters. Right wing grifters. They turned into grifters. And so I want to do a little bit of groundwork on that one. Hopefully next week I'll have some more comic books to review. Um, Last week we talked about the IDW Transformers universe. I may take another dive into that one and talk about Lost Light. Um, I am kind of fascinated with what's happening in the Spider-Man books right now. I'm fascinated and irritated at the same time. Um, I feel like Marvel has Peter Parker locked into this cycle of negative character growth where we just keep relitigating and rehashing the worst aspects of who he is, and never let him grow past it. And as you can see, this is my number one character, bro. I actually had this. I had this book. Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. What? Um, and so maybe I'll do that for my next show too, is talk a little bit about the character assassination of Peter Parker. And why they just seem to be kind of circling drain. I do like what they're doing with him where he's out in space now, where he kind of has his own little version of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Maybe they'll refresh his character. I don't really know what to make of Hellgate, the character that apparently beat his ass and made him retire as Spider-Man. I don't know what that is. And to be honest with you, I wasn't in the Spider-Man books like that until about 2 months ago because I had to leave. I really did, because Spider-Man books were really, it was really getting bad. It was getting like where it was unreadable stuff. And so, but this ongoing character assassination of Peter Parker, the inability to say, why don't we just, if we're gonna give him a love interest, we just put him with Mary Jane and that's it. Superman always has Lois. Why can't Spider-Man just have Mary Jane and that's it? Like, why does this need to be a thing? Not Mary Jane, Felicia Hardy, somebody. So I may talk about the destruction of Spider-Man and the character assassination of Spider-Man. That actually does sound like a good topic. So maybe I'll do a little bit of research on that one. But let me know what kind of stuff you guys want to see. My comic book bag is pretty deep. I've read everything from the old Marvel G.I. Joe comic books to the IDW Transformers comic books to a lot of stuff on Image in the 90s, because I went through my edgelord phase too. And even Image is still cranking out stuff. I've gone through the entire Walking Dead. I hate read The Boys, reissue of The Boys. I drug myself through that one. I've done most of the Kick-Ass books with Mark Miller. I don't like him. I don't like him as a writer. And so I have a lot of different things and topics that I'm aware of. Like I said, my two of my favorite characters in comic books are Spider-Man and Ben Grimm. But I also have a pretty good depth knowledge on Green Lantern lore, up until recently. I do know Batman. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Batman, but I do know a lot of Batman lore. And so just let me know what topics you want me to jump into, or if there's any books that I need to get up on. Drop that in the comments too. But anyway, I do appreciate y'all's time. Thanks for tuning in on this week's live stream. We didn't have any internet connection issues, which is a blessing. I know I keep talking about it, but I am going to be doing a recap maybe on Thursday or Friday. It's not going to be Saturday because we got a thing, but Thursday or Friday, I may do a recap on TikTok while I'm playing some games and stuff, and just talking about whatever, shooting the shit about whatever comes across, whatever horrific thing comes from DC. Maybe we could talk about it. So appreciate your time. Talk to y'all later. Oh, I do have a Substack. And so I'm getting back into my writing bag a little bit, and so I'm reworking some of my articles. I got about 20 things to go on my Substack, and I'm ready to go. And so we're going to start seeing some more video. You're going to start seeing videos, some written pieces and stuff over on my Substack. I haven't figured out the entire pricing model, but that's available. And I think the Patreon, I think I'm kind of figuring out what my community is going to be named, and I'm playing around with a couple of different names. So by the time you guys see me next week, hopefully I'll have a name for our community, the community that I'm looking to build. And so we'll see what it is. So anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.